All right, so we are 2 minutes to the hour. So good morning, good afternoon, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all for this live panel webinar where I have a pleasure to moderate an extremely talented set of government and private sector officials to provide perspective in terms of what innovations are happening in the corporate trade digitization. I'll start with myself. I'm Atul Patel. I work with dltledgers, a corporate trade digitization platform headquartered out of Singapore with offices in New Zealand and other parts of Southeast Asia, as well as Middle East and Africa. It's my pleasure to really introduce my fellow panelists here, and topic today is really focused around how we could support anyone who is involved in digital trade, specifically from a corporate standpoint, be you are an exporter or an importer, how you take advantage of some of the things that has been put in place both by the government as well as the private organization to support you in your journey of digitizing the trade. So with that, I would kick off the session, and I'll probably start with the introduction first. In no order of priority, what you see on the screen, I'll start first with Sin Yong. Sin Yong, if you could introduce yourself and tell a little bit about what you do, that would be a great start.
Hi, good day, everyone. I hope you guys can hear me. Can you?
Absolutely, all clear, Sin Yong.
Okay. My name is Sin Yong. I'm the Director for Trade under the Sectorial Transformation Group within Singapore's Infocom Media Development Authority, IMDA for short. My role is to look at what and how technologies can be effectively deployed in contributing towards the digital transformation of Singapore's wholesale trade sector. And for the benefit of those who are not familiar with IMDA, IMDA is actually a statutory board in the Singapore government under the Ministry of Communication and Information. Our organization regulates broadcasts and media content. IMDA also regulates telecommunication infrastructure, postal services, and personal data protection. Back to you, Adu.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sin Yong. And we have been working with IMDA now for over 3 years, Sin Yong, and the team has been a great supporter, a leader in terms of how digital trade connectivity could be established at the government level and how public-private partnership can be put to the action. So thank you, Sin Yong, for your support and your team's support over the last 3 years. Niels from New Zealand.
Yes, thank you. I'm Niels Meinderts. I'm a Senior Policy Officer at the Economic Division of the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. At this stage, I'm the supply chain lead, and I've been very much focused on working with exporters on COVID-related disruption, both to supply chains in terms of connectivity with the world. New Zealand's an island nation, and connectivity both from an air freight and a sea freight perspective is very important, and has been a challenging time over the last 18 months to maintain that connectivity. So a big pressure point for us was the documentation of our trade, and it was seen as a bit of a weakness, really. And so paper-based documentation in particular. So as part of our trade recovery work, we're focused on the digitization of trade agreement, of trade documentation, of paperless trade, and looking at how we can use the frameworks that we have in place with Singapore, including the Digital Economic Partnership Agreement, to come up with solutions to create a more resilient supply chain moving forward. Thanks.
That's awesome, Niels. And just to give a perspective, it was 12th of June 2020 in Singapore. In fact, the New Zealand was the first country in the world, along with Chile, where Singapore signed a digital economic partnership agreement. And one of the things that excited me the most was Article 2.2, where it talks about a paperless trade. and how the trade administration or trade execution documents would need to be acknowledged in either of the legs from a digital point of view, and that's a massive boost. So thank you so much, Niels, from your effort in MFAT as well as other agencies in New Zealand to really get this off the hook, and obviously IMDA to really kick this off. And there are certain advantages that we see as part of what we do. We have over 400 corporates who are looking to digitize, and we find that this agreement really kind of paves the way for some of those trade administration documents to be kind of transacted digitally, and that's a perfect kind of an air cover, if you will, that you could provide to an exporter, which is a segue into my next introduction. Dan is not just working in Fonterra, but he has a huge knowledge in customs. So over to you, Dan, in terms of your introductions, and we can kind of cover the next couple of minutes about talking about what Fonterra is and what you do there at Fonterra.
Perfect. Well, kia ora, everybody. I'm Dan Wright. I'm the Customs and R&D Manager for Fonterra. For those of you who don't know, Fonterra is a New Zealand-based dairy company. We're the world's largest exporter of dairy. And I'll just give you a bit of an understanding of really who we are, what my role is, and why we're so heavily invested in digitisation. So if you could just go to the next slide, please. So this map gives you a bit of a global understanding of where we have offices based. The reason why I wanted to show you this is we've got a very unique understanding of how different countries actually operate in a digital world, right from still paper-based wet signature countries, right through to data-driven systems like New Zealand and Singapore. Fonterra is very heavily invested in digitisation, digital systems, but from talking to my colleagues just the other day, despite the amount of countries that we are still sending electronic or digital data through for cross-border trade, we're still currently spending between $150,000 and $200,000 on fast freight to send documents around the world. So regardless of how much we've innovated around that, we're still spending quite a lot of money on just being able to send pieces of paper around the world. So this gives you, like I said, a really good understanding of where we operate and where we have different offices and our experience in actually seeing how these different economies actually operate. Part of that is we're actually also part of a World Customs and Organisations group called the Private Sector Consultative Group. And that's based in Brussels, excuse me. And part of that group is we actually provide customs agencies globally, especially at a policy level, around what works, what doesn't work, what we want to see improvement on, and we collaborate together on that. And very recently, they've actually introduced an Asia-Pacific group, which covers the APEC group right through to Iran, New Zealand, Asia. And this is the group that we're actually part of now, which Fonterra is actually the chair of. The Indonesian Customs Agency is actually the vice chair of it at the moment. So what we do is we provide an Asia-Pacific unique perspective on our trade. As you can see there, there's very different companies based in different economies on very different aspects to the spectrum on how they're actually dealing with digital trade. Overwhelmingly, no, the fundamental agenda that each of these companies want to take forward is digitisation. We are leading that with the Asia Pacific WCO group, and we are hopeful to get some really good outcomes, especially in our geographical area around improving digital trade. That's right from the beginning of just being able to accept a PDF document, right through to the other side, which is the pinnacle, the benchmark. What we're looking at is just pure data-driven trade. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Just one question, Dan, in terms of the focus of this private sector group, are you looking to go beyond the classic, import declaration, export declaration document, which I think, a lot of people say that as a single window system, and it's confused with actual trade administration document, which is quite a different set of documents. So what is really the focus of this, Dan?
Well, when you talk about digitisation, it means very different things to different groups. Whilst they're not in this group at the moment, the PSCG based in Brussels does have other indirect tax groups, so alcohol companies, tobacco companies, in some countries, vehicle manufacturers, which is considered an excise product. So local manufacturing groups as well, looking around digitisation, linking in with banks or other agencies as well, where they're not necessarily dealing with cross-border trade. But primarily it's around transmitting data to different groups, not just government agencies or single window platforms, but being able to securely send things at a fast pace. One thing that has been paramount in the last 2 years with the COVID issues and supply chain disruptions is the ability to be flexible and pivot at almost a whim when shipments are being diverted or changing around. And when you're relying on paper documents, you've got such a long lead-in time to be able to retrieve paper documents, send things out, send them through courier systems and so on, where if we could invest or have the ability to send things through digitally, it would be able to deal with things a lot better.
Awesome. That's perfect. So thank you so much for that, Dan, for the exciting work you're doing. And thank you so much for leading the pack, if you will, from a private sector. Appreciate that. So Ian, over to you in terms of your introductions. You've been also focused on this for quite a long while. So over to you for your introduction, Ian. You are on mute. You're still on mute, Ian. No. We can't still hear you. I think there's a second button from the top left that you can click. You left it on a little wait for Ian to come back. In the meantime, then, Sin Hung, if you could just introduce yourself and the work you do out here in Singapore.
Good morning, everyone. Just to check, are you able to hear me well?
Absolutely. Cool. All good.
Thank you, Arthur. Morning, everybody. My name is Sin Hong. I'm from Yankee Logistics. Very happy to be here. Thanks for giving me a chance, as well as to be together to all with the expert esteemed panels here. Well, I guess I'm the supply chain enabler in this group. Very happy to hear about what this program is about in terms of digital trade. Just a bit of introduction of ourselves. Yankee Logistics is based out of Singapore. Our HQ is in Singapore, but we aim to be a logistic partner of choice internationally for our clients, especially important in this current climate where supply chain is getting a lot of disruption. A lot of these items are being hold up in certain sectors. So therefore, we come in very important to give the clients good information and updates on what's happening to their cargo and how would their supply chain be flowing smoothly. A bit about Yankee Logistics. We are in about 11 over countries, mostly in Asia Pacific. We are also in New Zealand as well. You would know us as Flyway Logistics in New Zealand. We are in Australia as well, which is Exima Logistics. So in my current role, I am handling food logistics. Food logistics in the past 2 years have become a very critical topic from a lot of angles, especially in Singapore, where we don't have our own agricultural source. A lot of our imports, we still rely very much on New Zealand and Australia. So definitely in this area, we come in quite important to support the international supply chain, particularly in the sea freight as well as the air freight. Because the food logistics, a lot of it requires temperature control, food safety. I am handling this area separately as a business unit. We call ourselves Frigo Food Logistics. Our current clients stretches across a huge spectrum. They could be food growers. We have clients coming out from New Zealand. We also have fast-moving consumer goods like yogurt. Otherwise, for exports, we also work with food manufacturers, sometimes in Singapore, exporting to places in Australia and New Zealand. So typically these are the kind of clients that we handle out of Singapore. Maybe lastly, just in terms of capability, we are able to handle international air freight and sea freight. In Singapore, we do run cold chain logistics down to the warehousing as well as the last mile delivery. So that's a short introduction of myself. Happy to be here. I hand it back to Arthur again. Thanks.
Yes, no, thank you, Sin Hong. And Sin Hong is very, very, very polite. He's been a key person to drive some of the trade missions to Australia and New Zealand, and he's actually working on the ground to connect the exporters out of New Zealand into the importers into Singapore. So very happy to have you. I'm not sure, Ian, are you able to hear us? You're back on track. We can't hear you still, though.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello?
Yes, go for it, Ian.
Does that work?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you hear anything? You can. Okay,
Yes.
all right, great. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what went wrong. I seem to have dropped the link somewhere. My name's Ian McLeod. I'm the National Manager International Trade for Bank of New Zealand. And I work with a team of people across the country providing its customer-facing roles, providing risk management advice, trade at a macro level, then down to trade advice and how to work within countries and markets, all the way down to individual transactional structuring. We have a predominance of soft commodities, obviously, in New Zealand, from dairy to proteins, down to wool and that. So it's mainly a primary industries sort of play here, and yeah, a slight bias towards exporters. And that's probably enough at this stage, and I can talk a bit more in detail later. Oh, lumber and logs as well. There's a fair trade in that, and that's increasing. So
Awesome.
that'll do it.
Thank you so much. So that was good. Good to have you here, Ian, to provide perspective from a banking perspective as well on how you see digitization helping the customers cross-border business. So I'll bring it back to the next topic, which is really looking at how, Sin Yong, to you, how we could really, the awareness that you have created on a digital trade. How could a company can really get started on this, and maybe give your perspective in terms of the work that you've been doing within IMDA, as well as the assets that are available for companies who are looking at getting into the digitization. That would be great from your point of view.
Okay, from my point of view, actually, I've been in this area of digital trade for many years. And really the challenges surrounding digitalization of trade, specifically cross-border trade, is really not new. And if we are really, you just take a step back and think about it. One of the key reasons why we still need paper is trade typically involve many parties, exchanging lots of information using more often than not silo systems that are not integrated with one another. And because these silo systems are not easily integrated, paper then is the natural common denominator to carry information and data. And also contributing to the complexity is that different organizations have different level of digital capabilities and have different priorities in building their respective IT infrastructure. So with individual organizations working in silos, trying to solve industry problems, the net result is the lack of interoperability between organizations, and let alone the use of common standard for them to work together. And we all know that it's very costly for them to integrate so many silo systems at scale without clear international standard and a clear, efficient way of doing this. So recently, we actually had a trial with the Australia government, specifically Australia Border Force. And I think everyone knows that other than New Zealand, Chile, we also signed a similar digital economy agreement with Australia. And under this trial, we tested one document, which is called Certificate of Origin. And as we all know in international trade, this is a special document that's issued by government typically, or authorized agent of the government, but it's used for both. It's used in both commercial and compliance setting. And what the technology behind that we use is the Trade Trust initiative that IMDA started. And the way we look at data is that traditional method of exchanging data is that, look, we have to establish a trusted channel between exchanging party before flowing the data, so that the receiving party knows that this data come from a secure channel that the recipient can trust, and that means the data is authentic. So what Trade Trust does is to create a decentralized way of verification of data. And in this trial, a certificate of origin is actually a number of certificate or sample certificate of origin is issued by a government platform out of Australia, and is subsequently verified by another platform in Singapore, and in a distributed fashion. And we successfully tested the document interoperability between the platform. And it further showed that Trade Trust Framework removes the need for traditional approaches of using direct digital connectivity to enable data exchange among supply chain participants, which are slow and expensive to build. So similarly, between Singapore and Australia, we are actively looking out for industry participants that are willing to actually walk the journey with us, to be involved in project of such nature, to show that, hey, actually cross-border trade digitalization is not difficult and it's something achievable.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Sin Yong. And if I can just add it, wearing my DLT ledger hat, we have been working over last 3 years, and in fact, we were the first one to fully integrate Trade Trust into the platform, which is available now for any companies to kind of get started with respect to their journey towards digital trade. And obviously, certificate of origin is one document. The work that we did, Sin Yong, earlier in the year with respect to other documents like bill of lading and all other 17 different types of document that you need. So there is a ready-to-use a platform that one could use to really manifest, your trade that is happening today physically into a digital environment. So great work leading up, Sin Yong, to that, and congratulations on your recent work that you did. Moving over to New Zealand, Niels, from your viewpoint, what do you see as your priority in terms of supporting your private sectors as well in terms of digitization effort?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, with there being healthy competition between Australia and New Zealand always in all kinds of platforms, we'd like to effectively work with Singapore to expand the scope of what the IMDA have piloted with Australia, and effectively look at using the deeper platform as a basis to provide best practice in digital trade, and create consistencies, and create an example, a WTO plus example from which other countries can sign up to eventually. We've got a similar framework with Australia, and there are opportunities to align. The problem is you need many different agencies engaging to really create that aggregate platform. So from a New Zealand perspective, we need our customs agency, we need our foreign ministry, we need our Ministry of Primary Industries, we need our health agency, all working together to create, to basically be on the same page before we engage internationally. And it's the same with our partners in Singapore, to really have an effective aggregate platform you need multiple agencies working together, and not just government agencies. You need your private sector actors on board as well. So you need the banking sector, you need your large volume exporters to all effectively agree on what we're trying to achieve here. Because without cross-sector cooperation, it's very, very difficult. Thanks.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Niels. And we have done, part of the work. Our MD in New Zealand has done quite a bit of work over the last 18 months since we have been in New Zealand. And, Niels, in terms of the Singapore, New Zealand digital trade flow, that one that we could actually fulfill digitization is $1.2 billion, right, based on the estimates that we did. That is about 80 odd exporters from New Zealand and about 150 importers in Singapore. So I think the call out here is to really, to look at that it's already available for you to really try this out, put this into action, and start your journey, because it's a journey, right? Not everything would be ready on day one, but there are a lot of things which are ready, which you can get started if you are an exporter New Zealand, and if you're an importer in Singapore. So yeah, absolutely, the public-private partnership, which again, Sin Yong has been key instrumental leader to help us with here in Singapore, to support companies in the region who are looking for digitization. There's quite a bit of support financially as well as otherwise given to us to really get started on that journey. So I think there are support being run. Those who are interested can support those calls as well as move forward.
I mean, the real win here is not necessarily the New Zealand-Singapore trade, because that runs reasonably efficiently already, and there are useful digital frameworks within which we can already transfer trade documentation. The real win is deepening that and showing off to the rest of the world how it can be done. Right. So yeah, I'm happy to hear from others on that as well.
Absolutely, and we discussed that, right, Nils? I think if you have a webinar this from a year from now and see we get the same panels together, and we can track the progress. But I think it's a journey, right? Because it has to begin with showing the way, like you rightly pointed out, and that's perfect segue to then some of the challenges that you see in some of the markets where they're reversing things back, if you will, to from a digital to paper, and what you see is your experiences as you sit in kind of a bit of at a very prime position within Fonterra to really see how your export markets are behaving and where you see the challenges are and opportunities are.
Sure. Well, I'll just sort of reiterate the fact that what Neil said is, when you look at what we try to drive with Singapore in particular, I mean, we've got other economies we do this very similarly with, South Korea being another example, is we try to set the benchmark on how digital trade works. And every time we go around the world, talk with many different customs agencies or at the WCO, we talk about the relationship and the systems that New Zealand and Singapore in particular have put in place and heavily invested in. When we came to a situation like we did with COVID, where basically the world shut down, borders were closed, it was the countries that had heavily invested already in digital systems that were able to bounce back and actually reintroduce the flow of trade a lot easier and a lot more simple. Funny enough, I've been in Fonterra now for 4 years, and having been in New Zealand Customs for 13 years, a big thing that really needs to happen first is change and culture changes within these government agencies. I remember 7-8 years ago, one of my managers coming up to me telling me, what is this this cloud storage people keep telling me about? How do we stop it? And that's the old sort of enforcement mentality that a lot of people took back then. But thankfully, a lot of that is changing. But one thing that we do really see a lot from a Fonterra perspective is our issues around trade, and our issues specifically around free trade agreements in the APAC region tends to be around a piece of paper. It's not the data within the piece of paper. It's the piece of paper itself. Have you used a blue pen instead of a black pen? Have you used a tick instead of a cross or something along those lines, which has ended up costing Fonterra in particular quite a lot of money and having to go through litigation to win these things. where we are dealing solely with digital trade, and I use China as an example, where we are sending data directly to China in a digital way, very similar to what was being spoken about before between Australia and Singapore, transmitting data directly to a central system. It standardizes everything. It allows you more security and assurance that things are going to transition through the border a lot easier. That's because it's driven by central governments in a lot of these ways. It comes out to the other agencies as well, and it's driven very, very well. So we are actively, as I said before, actively promoting around the fact that if you talk about just using using data itself to transmit trade, it's all you need. I mean, free trade agreements talk about things like minimum data requirements. Then if that's all they need, why do we not just send the data rather than sending a piece of paper? We do this in other aspects of trade. We are moving towards things like e-bill-of-lading. It's all around using data. And if we can provide assurance on the source of that data, I mean, we do it for so many other things in our business. Our customers have told us that they want nutritional dairy products. So we've heavily invested in showing them through QR systems or other barcode systems, they can scan a dairy product, and that tells them exactly where that dairy product comes from in New Zealand. In some aspects, right down to the farm that it's come from. And that provides assurance on the data itself. Why can't we do that in trade? You know, we've heavily invested in actually providing data-driven systems directly from our Salesforce information. So the value information that customs agencies get is directly from our sales contracts. The shipping information is fed in directly from the shipping lines, MERS, Camberg, Sud, and all of them. We don't provide pieces of paper. We wouldn't have to unless it was a legislative requirement, and we're moving that way in China. It's fantastic. Hopefully within the next 12 months, every single piece of trade that we send through there through sea freight, there will not be a single piece of paper that goes through that trade, and it's fantastic. So we are promoting that. We are hoping that the rest of the world catches up, and we are trying to actually help a lot of countries get along that journey as well.
And absolutely, Dan, and that's we have got some experience working with corporates to create their own network to digitize, and corporate can do their part. While I think New Zealand and Singapore, the preferential documents that's needed as part of the government requirement, but there are also other documents which are still kind of physically sent across. And if I can create that counterparty network view from Fonterra, I think that's where I think you can see the expansion coming in and some real value for your own business and the network, right? So that's kind of where I see the platform like dltledgers can help to really create your own network. And it's kind of a +1 model, right? Where you don't need everybody there, but you need, let's say if you work with 15 companies in Singapore and only 5 are ready to be digital, you could work with 5 and then, in the next batch, get to the next 5 and next 5, and you continue to build the network, right? And that's nicely, you can build your own network as well. And that's what I see the private sector can really push through, because there's a lot of this kind of hiding behind the wall that happens. Oh, okay, government is not doing anything. But it's not so much that, because the trade still happens and people still pay 20% of the trade cost in the trade execution, which should not be the case. It should go into buyer or seller, isn't it? Because, why should I pay 20% of the cost as an admin cost, which is reality. And in fact, as of yesterday only, the gap has even widened in pandemic because of various discrepancies that has come in. The trade finance gap has even widened now. So I think there is a huge push that you could do yourself within the private sector to take advantage of what is already there between Singapore and New Zealand to really, get that going. So that's kind of what I see, where you sit in again. Yeah. Great. So from a bank point of view, yeah, I know you had some reservations and some opportunities, and what do you think that bank could do to facilitate this?
Can you hear me this time?
Perfect.
I don't know what's gone wrong. What we see from our exporters predominantly on a market share basis, it's their main markets are China. They are invested in systems and paper which support their business into those markets. And yes, there is some less rigorous trade, and by that I mean not using letters of credit and things like that into markets like China. But in the main, they're saying that their counterparties are not in a position where they're not thinking about digitizing. So it's difficult for them to invest a lot. I think they're talking about it every time I go and see an exporter. He's saying, tell me what's going on, who's doing what, how should we be thinking about this? But it appears as though their view of the world is very New Zealand centric. They're possibly not having the conversations with their buyers overseas and saying, what's your digital horizon look like? What investing are you doing in systems and processes? Where's your governmental support? What's your legislative frameworks like around the likes of blockchain, et cetera, I'm not hearing much noise on that at all. I've sort of asked people, well, where is your digital journey? What are you experimenting with? We've had a couple of goes and doing proofs of concept with a few exporters around digitizing. We've seen a bit around, and Dan mentioned it with regard to goods provenance and that story, and people going ooh and ah, but then you go back to them and say, well, are you interested in investing in this and taking it on to the next stage? Not quite yet. So I think we're at this transitory zone where people want to digitize. They've got legacy systems which can't really be altered today, and they can't see, they're also not sure of winners and losers. So they don't want to invest too much in one system or one methodology, and they're unsure which way the world's going. Their view predominantly is when China tells us we're going to digitize, we'll be pretty much going onto their system. And whether that's a reality or not, I have no idea. But that's that sort of maybe easy answer to them saying, don't worry, I'll get a portal and I'll sign into it. And that may be a reality, it may be not. And that's also possibly a little bit of digital naivety. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So, a couple of things there, right? So, Ian, in terms of, getting started, I think one of the things that we take pride about is that the platform that we have is actually live now for over 2.5 years. So there is really, the proof is in the pudding, right? So you could really, put the trade in and see how you could do it. And secondly, thanks to the effort of IMDA, I think, we got quite a lot of incentive going. So you could, basically try with very little investment or no investment, right? So I think people has to see it, because what I see in our part of the world now is a huge part of traction coming in where people have moved on and they've kind of thrown to me a trade. Okay, here is a trade. Can you show me how you are going to digitize this for me, right? And it literally takes a few minutes to set that up and set up the counterparties and onboarding, and we then get into discussion about how do I incentivize the counterparty, why do a counterparty need to come in, and we have the models in place. So right, so I think if you next get into any exporter conversation who is looking for some theoretical knowledge, tell them, look, it's already happening, and there's no investment that you need to do. You can get started with. If you got trade flows going, obviously, let's look at Singapore. Let's say, let's look at New Zealand, Singapore, and New Zealand, Australia. Let's say those two flows, which from your point of view would make a lot of sense. Then we pick up those and see, can you see it, right? And then you go back post Christmas and say, guys, it's already working, right? So I think that's where I think you can help the exporters to get going, to say, look, your trade hasn't stopped. You're still investing and spending a lot of money. Fonterra just talked about the millions of dollars that he's spending still today on some kind of paper, right? So there is a solution out there that needs to be tried. That's sort of what I see as a segue. In terms of the next steps, in terms of how we can see a logistics point of view, I want to ask, to say, what do you think from a logistics provider point of view, and given that you have done on-the-ground work with both New Zealand and Australia, work with those the traders out there from a Singapore point of view, what do you see as the opportunity and the challenge?
Thanks, Arthur. Morning, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'll just give maybe a quick sharing from a logistics point of view in terms of our digital journey. Because really, for Frigo Logistics, we are still quite traditional. The customers that we face are mostly B2B.
Right.
Although we still handle a lot of documents like BLs, invoice, packing lists that we receive from our clients, because all these are necessary as part of our process and procedures. But I'm happy to say that in a way, COVID has helped us. to digitize our ways. But before which, I would say that while I've shared that most of the things that we handle in terms of process can be digitized, but to some extent, because of our habits, certain areas we still stick to the more traditional way. For example, last year, some of my partners were asking me whether they can get back to the office, although we were in a kind of like in a lockdown situation. And my inquiry is, why do you still need to go back to the office when most of the things could be handled from home and digitized? And one simple reason that they gave me was because some of their clients are very traditional and still require paper invoice. So can you imagine to that extent that could basically be quite a stumbling block in terms of a digital journey. But I'm happy to say that we were able to digitize our ways and move into a work from home mode. I even went to the extent of removing the copier from our office, and everyone was still happy. They could still work from home. So that's just a short sharing in terms of a digital journey. You mentioned about the New Zealand and Singapore partnership. I had the privilege to join Enterprise Singapore as well as New Zealand Trade Exporter about 2 years ago, meet traders from Singapore to explore what are the opportunities to meet new suppliers and for us to come in as a supply chain enabler. I thought that was quite interesting. The partnership between New Zealand and Singapore is very strong. Today, I still get inquiries on how can we utilize this partnership. How do we use Singapore to be a RDC to help New Zealand customers who potentially see Asia or Southeast Asia as a region to grow in terms of their market size? Because, for example, your manufacturing could be in other parts of Asia, but your clients could be B2C and on a digital platform. How do you do it in the most effective way while still be able to ensure that your supply chain is smooth? Because if you are on a B2C e-commerce platform, you want to reach out to your clients, you want to have that inventory ready and to be able to respond quickly so that your clients have got great experience. But on top of that, definitely the topic on digital trade is very important because on the supply chain angle, physically we can manage it out of Singapore because of our connectivity. But we need to talk about trade, digital trade, because a lot of that is done now on the internet. On top of which, you also need to wrap your head around what are the customs requirements, what could be the duties. So I think that's where the partnership with the DLT is important. They have provided this platform, and we are exploring very closely how we could partner with them and bring some of our clients onto this platform so that everybody can benefit together. Yeah, so that's my sharing so far. Thanks, Atu.
Thank you so much. And then I think we talked about, some of the documents like food certificate or health certificate, which, where in past you kind of, needed to get the courier across. Can you share a little bit about the challenges where you had seen in past, which could be digitized with the dltledgers platform?
Sure. The health certificates, the one that I'm specifically mentioning is mainly for the meat trade, such as the beef, the pork, or sometimes the poultry. It's a very interesting one. While I mentioned that most of our processes documents can be digitized in terms of what we can do on the internet over the platform, which is already readily available, but yet I still observe that the health certs need to be physically expressed or couried over to Singapore to the traders to receive it. In terms of the custom declaration to the Singapore food agencies so that I can raise a permit to import the cargo into Singapore, that is all done online. But yet I still find it funny that we still need the original certificate. So if that is something that we could digitize to help the traders, I think number one, it will save a lot of cost. Number two, it can also help to expedite the data because everything is trusted and it's on the platform. From what I understand from the traders so far, really this part on the health cert is not so much for the trade, but really for the physical inspection at the warehouse or at their own factories, where sometimes the food agency inspectors will need to go down on the ground. They see the product, they also wish to see the health certificate. But again, I think this is something that we can digitize. If the platform is ready, we can definitely extend to the other agencies so that the trust and the credibility of the data is there.
No, awesome. That makes a lot of sense. So I wanted to bring it back to to maybe Dan, from your point of view, looking at where you sit today, and you talked about some of the efforts you are doing today in digitization. What would be the couple of key, I would say, wish lists that you would have in terms of New Zealand Singapore trade, and how best we could support that wish list in terms of where you sit in, and what you could do with respect to your trade flows into Singapore?
I think when we talk about trade flows into Singapore, I think we talk about the bench markets. We don't really have too many issues other than the global supply chain. But I think when we are being realistic here, what we would look at is how do we send data or even documents securely and provide assurance over our trade. And I think that's what people are starting to look at now, blockchain systems or government-to-government transition processes of transmitting data across to other agencies. So I think, look, we've always been open to look at these platforms and to see what they can provide. As much as people want assurance over the integrity of our dairy products, our customers and our foreign import brokers also want assurance over the quality and the integrity of the data and the documents that we send as well. So those are definitely some things that we're looking at around what platforms can actually transmit data and how we can actually use that as a benchmark to other countries within the APAC region.
Yep, yeah, Dan, and we talked about that, right? So all of us who are invested into this trade digitization and, passionate about helping all the constituents on digital trade, we want to establish a gold standard, isn't it? It's a gold standard between New Zealand and Singapore, and that's something, we all can be proud about the effort if you could do, right? So there's a lot of...
It shows what can be achieved, because there's other economies in the APAC region in particular that are far behind Singapore and New Zealand. But it's a journey, and it's a long journey. It hasn't happened overnight, that's for sure. But what it did show is that investment, when we had issues like the global supply chain disruptions and so on, those are the economies that came out of it very, very well. So it's about just encouraging, and where appropriate, capacity building in those markets as well.
Yeah. And just a little bit about what we are doing at dltledgers to support that is really putting a team in place, because we understand, yes, platform is there, but there is also an onboarding aspect of it or adoption aspect of it. So we have a significant team in place, both in Singapore and New Zealand, to support anybody who kind of, does not know anything about blockchain or doesn't know anything with digital, because, he or she, at least in Singapore, there are some of the smaller, medium-sized companies, and we are really faced with the WFH issues in terms of, some days you can go, some days you can't go. So how can we kind of enable and train? So again, thanks to IMDA, Sin Yong and his team, we have got an excellent adoption support to get started. So, several of your importers could just get started, and, there's no commercials involved for you to really see how it looks. And the mechanism that we work with is we do kind of a parallel trade, and then we kind of get themselves comfortable, support them, and move forward to the next, right? So I think it's fantastic. We can maybe check in again in a few months' time to see what the progress has been. I'm also conscious of the time, and Sin Yong, in terms of your view in terms of what we could do to the Singapore importers, who are, I think, as I said, about 115 of them whom we have reached out, and many of them are on the call. What would be your message to them? What should they do if they are looking to digitize?
Actually, my starting point has always been what is the business problem you're trying to solve, and what is causing you the pain.
Right.
Just like Sin Hong just now shared about the need to actually courier the original health cert over across to Singapore. Previously, we had some discussion. My first question is always, why do you still need to courier the original set of document? Because based on what we understand, the single window in Singapore are all done 100% online without the need for any original document. So finally, as what you have shared, the trader insists that they keep the original just to make sure that when there's an on-site inspection by the authority, the traders are prepared. So the question is not about whether the authorities got the data, but the on-site officer that actually inspect the cargo need to have the ability to authenticate a certain set of document that is authentic and it has not been tampered with. So the notion of everything go digital, yes, is the target that every one of us working on this area is striving towards. But I've been working on digital trade for the past 30 years, and today paper is still there. So that is a reason why we adopted quite a different approach to solving the digitalization problem, because we subscribe to the view that we cannot do away with paper overnight. And one of the main reasons why we cannot do away with paper overnight is because the level of digital readiness and digital capability among the supply chain or trade ecosystem player differs a lot. So how then can we facilitate the transformation or the digital transformation of the various actors along this long supply chain? We come up with a framework that allows the interoperability between paper and electronic. And that is what we did. And this will allow those that have the necessary digital means to go ahead without needing to depend on his trading partner. And this is a new approach of doing trade digitalization that we are trying, we are showing by doing a lot of pilots and trial with many of our partners across the world to show that how this can be done. And we strongly believe that this approach will actually help us get where we want to go in a shorter period of time.
No, awesome. Thank you so much, Sin Yong. And that's where we also are spending significant time to automate what I call digital natives, and the maturity of those digital natives along the supply chain, because a surveyor or an insurance guy or parties in middle may not be digitally ready. So we are spending a lot of time in creating those adoption frameworks and trying to support them with an online, offline sort of a support so that they could get started. And that's been a significant investment, thanks to you again, Sin Yong, into our platform to have that adoption going. So I would love to get Neil's point of view in terms of, Niels, if you are hearing us, what do you think the New Zealand exporters should do from where you are sitting now, and what could be kind of key takeaways that you wanted to pass across to those New Zealand companies which are listening to this webinar?
Just checking you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, great. Look, at the end of the day, this is all about building trust. It's building trust between government to government agencies. It's building trust between private sector actors and government actors, between regulators, between those who are negotiating the free trade agreements and those that are implementing the free trade agreements, and getting to know each other in informal frameworks and discussions like this is really useful, because we need to learn from each other. Officials need to learn from the private sector as to how trade is actually transacted, because if you don't have an understanding of the practical aspects of trade, you can't exactly look to create the efficiencies that need to happen in this space. So that's where I'll leave it.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Niels. And in terms of your sort of key takeaway to the people who are listening on this, what would that be if you have to summarize that?
I just think it's buyer and seller need to both be digitally wanting to move it forward. I think Dan's comments, I can see that he's a buyer and a seller in some markets to himself, and he has probably the best opportunity to explore those and create a framework which allows other people to learn as well. But it's, yeah, the moment we get the counterparty saying, I want to, then I can see our exporters very quickly, and I'm not going to talk the detail around health certs and the other sorts of things which are limiting, but they can sit outside in the meantime, but they can digitize to a reasonable extent or to quite an extent. I think the moment there's a willingness, and at the moment we seem to have either one party or the other, and we don't quite have there's not enough of us holding hands.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. There's not enough quorum out there. That's what you're saying. But I think we could do a bit to increase that. Final comment from you, Dan, before we close off the session?
Final comment from me?
Yeah.
Oh, look, I think everybody's on the same page that what we want, and it's just about that journey of how we get there. I mean, as was alluded to before, Fonterra is in a unique situation where we have a good footprint in in a lot of the markets here, and we are a buyer and a seller, that's for sure. But we also can be part of that journey to provide data systems and platforms that others can look into, and we can helpfully try and provide a benchmark out to a lot of other companies and countries out there. So yeah.
Awesome.
Petition.
I was just reminded by my supporter here that I have a lot of questions here. So let me just take a look at the questions. If I can just see the questions and see. All right. So I think there is a question in terms of imagine if a corporate sign-in, what is the level of digitization support that can be given today? Yeah, so maybe I can just take that to say, look, corporate can sign in. There is a free support extended thanks to IMDA for you to get started in your journey. There's an adoption team which is available, and it's a full end-to-end support which can be given to really operationalize your trade flows which are out there. So yes, I think there was a link which was given in the webinar. If not, I think there will be a follow-up link where you can sign up, and that's what Sin Hung was talking about as well, who is actually one of our customers looking at digitizing his trade flows as well. So you could do that as well. There's a question, maybe the challenge of enabling the platform interoperability appears to be the need of each platform to independently validate the other platform participants. What's the progress being made creating the trust between the platform to avoid duplication and rework by trader? This may be, Sin Yong, your question in terms of how do you bring the trust between different platforms with the work that you've done in Trade Trust, I guess.
Actually, the technical term that we often use is called decentralized trust economy.
Right.
And I can actually talk at least half a day on this. And this is exactly what we do. When you talk about data exchange among parties, right? Most often than not, the receiving party need to have a way to make sure that whatever data that you receive is authentic, and it comes from the source that you can identify with. And this is exactly what we do. And also, most often than not, it's quite limiting for us to only look at data exchange from a pure data perspective. But if you look at it, how trade is conducted, data is actually in the document. So that actually brings us back to our notion of having interoperability between offline and online processes, between paper and electronic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's one more question here saying, does my counterparty have to pay for this digital trade execution when I onboard? No, they don't have to pay for it. And that's the beauty of it, that you could have unlimited counterparties that you can set up, and onboarding support is also given extended free to you. Is there any other question? Does the New Zealand past conversation of POC in blockchain for trader, do we have the support? Yes. So the way it is that if you are a New Zealand exporter and if you're part of this webinar, you will also be extended the free support. So do sign up to us, and you would be able to see the experience of the platform that we have available for you. So yes, there's one more question to Niels. Niels, if you're there, how can New Zealand, Singapore, I think Niels has left the room, but the question is, how can New Zealand, Singapore digital agreement can support our adoption within the current framework? So as I said, the Article 2.2 of the framework, which I think talks about trade administration document to be supported digitally, and within the dltledgers platform, we are fully integrated to trade trust, MLETR compliant. We'll be able to manifest the actual implementation of DEA through the execution of the trade. Remember, I talked about 1.2 billion number. So that could be, put in place through the dltledgers platform. I can see Niels come back. Niels, if you can hear us, there is a question for in terms of how can a New Zealand, Singapore DEA with the customers in New Zealand, what can they do to get started? I guess that's a question. If you have anything to add.
Sorry, I'm going to have to log off shortly. I've got another call coming up. So I've got nothing else to add on that. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Niels. I think we are good. I think we are already 3 minutes over. If there are other questions, we would definitely provide the Q&A as part of a response back. But I wanted to thank everyone, all my esteemed speakers, to come in and share this thought. This has been excellent learning for me, myself, and we really appreciate you taking the time off to create this awareness. And then we hope to reconnect again in a few months' time to see the progresses and really appreciate everyone's help. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.